Good morning, everybody, to our session, Building Back Better Towards Empathic Neighborhoods and Next Generation Cities. Welcome to this event organized by Concordia University. And we have an interesting panel for you with a very broad range of stakeholders. From industry, from student activists, from academics, think tanks, because it's a big topic. I mean, as you can imagine from the width of this title, I mean, if you talk about neighborhoods or next-gen cities even, we're covering a very broad range of topics from quality of living, on neighborhood sustainability, resilience, which is a big issue in terms of climate change. And you may remember that we are in a climate emergency just now. So I've just come back from COP26, and it's quite clear that unless this decade until 2030 is a decade of action and action in the cities and municipalities, we will never be able to meet our climate targets. And I think that's pretty essential because for start, Canada and many other countries have set very ambitious carbon reduction targets. It's even a law now. The Canadian Net Zero Emission Accountability Act just passed in June. And there's a commitment of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 45%. So as more than 80% of Canadians actually do live in cities, that's where the action needs to happen. At the same time, we need to make sure that the transition is just and socially inclusive, and that the quality of life doesn't degrade. So there are a lot of challenges that we want to address in these next 90 minutes. Of course, we also want to talk about very concrete solutions, because time for action is now. And then in the final session, we try to bring all the panelists together again to see how we can bring together the very different stakeholders that we need to make this urban change happen. And just a short word to the panelists that we have here today. My name is Ursula Alka. I have a Canada Excellence Research Chair in Smart, Sustainable and Resilient Cities and Communities at Concordia University. And I have a big team of about 50 graduate students, and we're trying to address the urban transformation from very different angles, from built environment, mobility, urban greenery, wastewater, and of course, livability. We have industry partners. Stefan Chaillet from Siemens is joining us to talk about the infrastructure challenges from an industry perspective. We have a very active student from Concordia who will help with the discussion of how to bring in people in this whole debate around next-gen cities and empathic neighborhoods. François Bédard from Numana, Montreal is a big thinker on empathic neighborhoods and what it means in terms of technology, digital solutions, but also participation of citizens. Mary Rowe has a very broad range of contacts, networks in the Canadian context, talks to the mayors all the time. So she will bring us a lot of practical experience of where the barriers and conditions are to make change happen. And finally, Simon Racicot-Degnaud from the innovation team of Hydro-Quebec will again talk about technologies and how the future will look like with all this amazing green, clean, renewable energies and energy efficiency. So just to finish the introduction, I just want to mention a few words on an institute that we just founded at Concordia in 2020, the Next Generation Cities Institute. And as you see from the sort of many bubbles around the three main research clusters, there are 14 existing university research centers that deal with this very broad scope of activities that we have around next-gen cities. So we have engineers, of course, who deal with sort of the water, energy, sustainability. with net zero energy buildings. We have researchers from the John Molson School of Business on real estate and financing models. We have social scientists working on aging in the city, social justice questions, of course, and then we have artists and gaming people who try to create engaging tools to make these digital twins that we're all talking about more accessible for decision makers, but also for citizens, and many more. We have about 200 professors joined us in this effort to come up with solutions for sustainable, of course, modern, mobile, inclusive, and livable cities and communities of the future. So with that introduction, I want to go to the first session. We divided this whole 90-minute block into 3 different topic areas. So first we're going to talk about the challenges, then we address solutions, hopefully very concrete examples, and then we try to converge the different topics and discuss change mechanisms with all the panelists in the last block. And after each of these blocks, the audience will of course be involved, and you can ask questions in the chat, and we try to bring you into the conversation as much as possible. So let us start with the first block. So if we talk about challenges, we really want to discuss of what needs to happen to transform these neighborhoods into zero carbon, empathic, inclusive, mixed-use neighborhoods. So are there good examples, best practice examples, and what are actually the features that are essential for such a smart and empathic next-gen neighborhood? So I hope the technology of this platform works, and Stéphane Chaillet can now come in the conversation. And then Mehdi Kapotzi will join. Stéphane is the Senior Vice President of Siemens Canada Limited, responsible for infrastructure at Siemens. And let's see whether it works and he can join us on stage. Maybe I just stop sharing for a second to see whether I can find Stéphane on stage. Okay.
Hello guys, I'm Francois, and I think we have some technical issues, so Stéphane will join in very soon because the Teams is facilitating these connections in the back.
All right.
Ursula, thank you very much to have this panel on a very, very important topic. Like, let's call it like an empathic approach, and what does it mean from an empathic perspective? So if we can have the slides, I think there's so many stories we can tell about it and what basically is the foundation of those initiatives. So thank you, Ursula. For the people who doesn't know, so Numana is the new tech. So I'm leading the empathic building and neighborhood ecosystems. But first of all, what is empathy definitions and what empathic definition is also. So fundamentally, empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from with their frame of references. That is the capacity to place oneself on another position. And definition of empathic encompass also a broad range of emotional states. So the challenge is, from a technology perspective, what does it mean? So let's go to the other definition. Empathic definition, showing an ability to understand and share the feeling of another. So we are in 2022. There's so many IoT devices everywhere. So we know that we will generate some data. But because we are into connected environment, and this is aligned with energy efficiencies, electric transport, EV charging stations, real estate promoters, and how those ecosystems could be better designed first. So what we did at Numana, and we started this pathway in basically in December 2019. Ursula was with us because we were launching the think tank of Humanitech. So basically, we have a definition of empathic buildings and neighborhoods. So today, we're focusing on improving employee citizens' experience, well-being, and also happiness by delivering a human-centric value proposition. So basically, a complete end-to-end smart solutions that combines technology, IoT, sensors, culture, and also physical space into one view. That's what we do through Numana. Next slide, please, Ursula. So there's one thing that we need to understand. A city, a neighborhood is not a product. It's a platforms of services, meaning that our élus municipal do have a responsibility. So Quebec will say that the municipal level is basically the gouvernement de proximité, which is true. But actually, there's three pillars that are fundamental for every neighborhood: security features, resiliency features, and also high availability. Because today we're facing a huge challenge on workforce, digital workforce, but also how can we be more concerned about the other generation and having more social inclusions. My story around this, and this is very funny. I used to live in my land. I have three kids in my land. So basically, what people are asking me to do is to basically redesign what my land was. I've been there like 25 years ago. So I was in the good years of the Myland in 96, having three kids and having Ubisoft coming in. It's totally changed what the neighborhood was aiming to do. Because first, there's about 5,000 employees of Ubisoft right now. But actually, because I can quote Richard Ryan, the beauty of what Myland was and is today is about on three words: mixty, mixty, mixty. It was not only because real estate promoters wants to be in, because it was providing a community of individual who needs to work together. So basically, empathic buildings and empathic neighborhood, this is exactly the purpose of what is the real fundamental. Even talking about the new economic systems that goes into the neighborhood, talking about parking meters. What do we do? Because in the mainland, there's not enough also parking meters. But as a community, we were able to live all together. And having those social discussions and having those artists part of that discussions. Next slide, please, Ursula. So as we know, because I think the Cloudemy totally give us more reasons to be collaborative and working into those new environment. Yes, the consumer is, I call it like a blockchain consumer. I'm not talking about the technology also. It's more about how the consumer is fully, totally more connected. And there's also other services that goes with it: connected health, smart homes, smart neighborhood, smart buildings, smart environment, smart cars, pay, and also align with those digital new services that goes over the top and pay services, also energy, and fundamentally how the insurance companies are part of that new ecosystems, which is the fundamental of what an empathic building and empathic neighborhood is also. So this is like stakeholders by default, but having a real citizen focus. Next slide, please, Ursula. So how do we make sure we can deliver those ecosystems? The big lessons, and that's what I do through Numana, we're having people that usually don't speak to each other. So we have Lemay, we have Siemens, we have GLL, we have Concordia, we have l'ETS, we have startups. Also, the government of Quebec is following this. We have also an approach according to what BIM is, because the BIM for the real estate promoters and constructions is basically the art of how do we conceive those new environments. But BIM is a platforms to be more efficient, to be more transparent. There's going to be more data that needs to be managed. But now we're going into a digital twin perspective and having an organic digital twin to try to evaluate and simulate those use cases about what are the right requirement to enable an empathic neighborhood. Next slide, please. So, okay, this is the slide of Mary. So, the fundamental and the big message of what we're doing through Numana, which is a nonprofit, is basically we need to work with inclusive stakeholders with the right path, and also to understand the real impact that we want to design today for the next 10 years. This is an ecosystem discussion with stakeholders, and thank you very much to be there. I feel very privileged to bring these notions. It needs to be a team effort by default. That's the big message. Thank you.
I think it's a big effort in the city, and basically every city with their own ecosystems of very diverse stakeholders that really need to come together to bring in this sort of multidisciplinary view on how change can happen. And so it's for sure not just the technology. It's people are interested of engaging with their community, and technology is a means of sharing data and finding out who's also interested. So and I think we need to make much more use of that social function that technology offers to come up with solutions. So as the moderator, I'm curious who will be in my next guest. I mean, we had a plan, of course, but the plan is changing depending on how our fabulous digital platform here works. And I see Simon on stage. Would you be able to join the main stage now? Oh, great. Okay, so as I said, we are very spontaneous today. Totally different order of speakers, but we do the best we can to make a coherent story happen all the same. So I pass over to Simon Rassico-Degnaud to present himself, of course, and the work that Hydro-Québec is doing, and the visions of the future, and of course the future will be very electric. And so, as you might know, we don't yet have a majority of our energy produced by electricity. So there's a big challenge to change our current system, especially around mobility, which is completely fossil fuel based, to a renewable system. And I'm very happy that Simon has joined us to give us the view and vision of Hydro-Québec. And I will try to find the right slides now and let you speak. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ursula. I'm very happy to be with you guys today to be able to share Hydro-Québec's perspective. The energy transition, we have to recognize it has a major disrupting effect on the energy mix and how we're going to treat energy in the future. And very often people tend to think that in Quebec, because of our hydroelectricity, we're pretty much decarbonized. But when you look at the total energy mix that we have today, we still have 53% of our total energy in Quebec that is coming from oil and gas. And when you see how to decarbonize this 53%, it's what you see on the right. You know, when we project ourselves in 2050, it's clear that transportation is going to be a quarter of that effort to decarbonize. Electro technologies will play a major role as well for industries, 44%, and the balance is going to be from green hydrogen or other carbon neutral fuels. So we can go to the next slide. And when you look at the energy transition, the impact it's going to have on the grid itself. In order to decarbonize, we're going to see a lot more decentralized production and a lot more connected objects related to the grid. So today we have a one-way for the electrons to circulate. You know, they go from generation, transportation, distribution into the homes or businesses, and it stays there. But in the future, with all of this distributed energy production and consumption, we will see a true bidirectional network or grid. So we have to see the individual houses or businesses as small dams. I like that image because I think it illustrates exactly what it's gonna look like. When we go to the next slide, how do we do this? You know, clearly we're gonna need to collaborate. The time where people develop things on their own side and came to the market with it. I think this time is over because of the size of the challenge and the speed at which we need to move. So clearly, it's our perspective. It's going to be a true collaboration between all parties involved. You know, a lot of emerging companies, startups, large customers as well need to be involved from the get-go, just to make sure that whatever is being developed by the companies and the startups really answers the customer's need. We see that college, universities, research centers will be heavily involved as well, all in with the government and all the organization, all in the collaborative effort. I think that the cohesion, you know, between all parties, the alignment of interest is going to be really key if we want to make our goal of decarbonizing the society. We can go to the next slide. A good example, I was talking about the change on the grid itself. We firmly believe that the microgrids will become more and more known and used. It's the way to have local production, local autonomy, resilience. With the energy transition, also come climate change, and and climate change, we see drastic events. Last year, for example, we had seen a large, very, very large winds or intense winds throughout the province of Quebec, everywhere at the same time. It's the first time that we observed that. And this has a major impact, of course, on the transmission line. What we used to see in the past was events like this, but localized. So the more that we are able to bring the production or the generation closest to the charge, really to the used, with a microgrid, that's what it accomplishes. So we think it's a big opportunity. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see we have established a microgrid at Lac Mégantic. After a terrible events that occurred there with the rebuild of downtown Lac Mégantic. We took the opportunity to contribute and install a microgrid. So they're autonomous, but also linked to the main network. So if need be, we can there's a connection. We can supply energy through the main network, but in essence, they're able to operate by themselves. With solar panels, battery storage. Smart devices are also key in the microgrid to make sure that we make the best use of energy. And of course, a centralized control system to control all of this. So if we go to the next slide. So it's combining all of our efforts. I've talked about the microgrids here because I think it's key. But we also have to look at construction. I was mentioning the energy efficiency of the future. That's also very important. Circular economy. Of course, if we're able to reuse, we use less energy to do so. Transportation, storage are all keys that we need to go throughout the entire. And we need to look at the entire network as a whole, but also in regions to be able to supply the energy that's required. If we go to the next slide, we see that today we're fully engaged with the City of Montreal. There's 3 different projects that are underway that we're developing with them to try to think collectively again the neighborhood of the future. Hydro is a portion of this from an energy standpoint, but there's a lot of other variables that need to be accounted for when we rethink the neighborhood of the future. So
I can tell you that I'm now seeing myself, Marlene, and Mary.
I think that concludes my portion of the presentation, Ursula.
And I have said no.
In the debate, I don't know whether he's on. Otherwise, while we're waiting for the next, I don't know whether Simon can still come back and we answer maybe a couple of questions. I would be, if that's possible. Yes. Okay. Great. Just one short question. I mean, all this transformation, of course, needs a lot of investment in technology, in renewables, in the whole storage, energy management. And I mean, you've built, as Hydro-Quebec, I assume, built the first sort of pilot projects. How do you see that scaling up? Will it be all in the responsibility of Hydro-Quebec as our energy company, or do you see also multiple other stakeholders building these systems, these decentralized generation systems?
I think I mean, solution won't come only from Hydro-Quebec. That's obvious. It comes back to my slide of collaboration. I really need to put universities, researchers, along with small companies and customers to find the best technology solutions for the future. So I think that's absolutely key. We are an enabler. That's our goal. So in order to find technology and to support small companies and the development, because value creation, it's also a large opportunity to have a lot of value creation.
One thing
with this project. So I think sorry, I'm hearing two different voices at the same time. So I hope you don't have the same.
I feel I'm in a no man's land.
But collaboration will be key. So clearly, Hydro-Quebec won't be alone in this. We need the support from small companies, and I think that's how we're going to create the best value, and we'll be able to go as fast as possible in the transition.
So, I mean, we've been hearing Stéphane Chaillet from Siemens, so maybe his technology works now. So if Stéphane could come on stage, then thanks, Simon, for the insights. I mean, at the end, once we had the sort of, it works. So at the end, we will have, once we have the keynote presentations over, everybody will be back on stage. And then we have a joint discussion. That seems to be probably the most easy way to go about this difficult management of our conference platform. But I'm now very happy that finally we got Stéphane Chaillet from Siemens on stage, and I will find you your slides, and then the word is yours. Okay. So welcome. Yeah, I bring up your slides, and then you can start talking. Let's see. Okay. Rapid. Go ahead. Oh, there's no sound from Stéphane. Okay, now.
So we're talking about how we can decarbonize the world, and one angle that we see from Siemens is that to be able to decarbonize, we're going to have to go fully electrified. And to do that, we're going to have to decentralize electrification. It's going to affect, of course, buildings, the heating and the cooling of the industrial process also, and mobility. I'm not going to cover farming because it's also a source of CO2, but mainly the infrastructure aspect, including mobility in the industrial world. So to decarbonize, we'll have also to digitalize. And on the bottom of the screen, you see all aspect that needs to be covered. District energy will be fluctuating. We're going to have decentralized energy, the integration of mobile, renewable, that's going to be private, but also public. Increasing the complexity with the electrification of transport, which is a storage source that's going to be mobile and available everywhere very soon. All this will need intelligence, and it will need data processing, cybersecurity. And if we do all this the right way, we can definitely contribute to decarbonize with automation and digitalization. Massive quantity data will have to be analyzed. My point on that slide is that the technology is already existing, it's already operating, it's there, it's available, it's a matter of implementing what we have. It might not be perfect, but it's good enough to start going. Next slide. So we're covering here all aspects, again, in a different shape. But the systematic interaction of electrification from various sources to automation and digitization, as you can see on the bottom, is going to be the basis of the new energy sector. And the infrastructure will be interacting with the grid, so something very different than what we've seen in the past, and maybe with the presentation from our colleague from Hydro-Quebec. The one-way street is no longer valid in the future. It's going to be a two-way street for the electrification. And the software that's going to be needed to be able to manage this is quite important. But all this cannot be done without a good understanding of the population and a buy-in of the population, also pulling on those energy structure and also energy landscape to make it a viable ecosystem. And on that, I'm going to turn to Madeleine, because we really need Madeleine to have the people, the general people, to understand, buy into it and pull on this to make it happen. And I think from your generation, there's a gap there. There's something that needs to be done for that beautiful technology to be in place. Over to you, Madeleine.
Student activist who has actually a degree in design to join us on stage. And so that's...
While Madeleine is coming, what we wanted to present is the two extreme end of the spectrum. On the technology side, Siemens has the technology, very sophisticated technology, but on the other side, the decision maker are the byproduct of the population making decision by voting. And there's a need for a better understanding that Madeleine's gonna talk to you about.
Well, it seems we don't see her yet. So while we wait, I mean...
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, now we have you. Yes, we can hear you. Don't see you yet, but...
Okay. If you could just open up the slide.
Yes, I was still continuing to share, but it... just wait a second. I need to do it again. Okay, do you see it? Yes, okay, you're on.
Okay, so coming off of Stefan's introduction there, I wanted to speak a little bit about this challenge of how to gain residents' support, involvement, and collaboration, which to me is about people-centered design. So this is essentially taking as your starting point the everyday concerns, needs, hopes, and aspirations of people whose participation you are seeking. So this isn't necessarily speculation. It's ideally it's gathering insights through observation, interaction, dialogue with the group, really trying to get that direct connection. So it also involves changing the question that you're asking. So from how do we get people to participate in the energy transition to what are people's wants, needs, and concerns, and how can we address them with the energy transition? So we're talking about meeting needs. There are a lot of issues felt today by young people, activists, many people of low income who are potentially doing work that, that they're not receiving financial compensation for. People are squeezed. In the case of students with student loans, we're actively paying out of pocket to do things within the realm of our studies. And at the same time, there's these everyday challenges being faced, which may feel remote to older, more established working professionals. So some examples include accessible education, right? Tuition, cost of life, it's expensive. There's less time for paid work. Accessible transport, it can be a big expense. Utilities, also a big expense. Secure and accessible housing. we're in the midst of a housing crisis. And then there's also less tangible needs that people have for things like advancement, autonomy, competence, as well as community, pleasure, and joy. So the people-centered question is, how can our solutions also serve needs of these kinds? And so I just wanted to really briefly touch on an example. It's the A9 land tunnel. This was in the Netherlands by an organization called Twins for Good. The municipality of Amsterdam was looking for community support in building a new tunnel in a very densely populated area. They took this approach. They undertook field work to reach residents and determine these daily concerns and motivations. And they ended up establishing a social enterprise for talent development, because that's what they discovered was important to people in that area. And the resistance to the project evaporated. People were happy to see it once it started to really meet a need that they felt. So at the same time, I want to talk about inviting imagination, because people-centered design it's not just about ownership and participation, it's also about ingenuity. We're talking about tapping into the unique situated expertise of everyday people on the understanding that their embeddedness in a situation and the constant live feed of data and ideas that this position generates is extremely valuable. So how do we awaken that pride? How do we make it more obvious just how lucky large institutions would be to have these people included in their process? So this means, ideally exploring the potential for residents' involvements to grow, to deepen, to mature, and ideally that it all adds up to life becoming more rich with possibility for people. So another example that I wanted to really briefly touch upon, it was in Switzerland, Impact Hub Lausanne. They were working with a regional authority there and redefining their energy transition strategy through co-creation processes. And one of the ideas that came up was that energy would be free up to a certain amount, after which the user must pay for it at a high price. And I just want to bring this in because I think it's a good example of why it's really valuable to do these processes. You get really novel ideas from people who will be able to relate to it in an everyday way. So finally, just a couple challenges with co-creation, because it sounds great, but it's difficult to do in practice. It's trust, right? Is the desire for collaboration authentic? Is there a sense of mutual respect? Also, homogeneity, right? Participation doesn't always reflect the demographics of the area. Some differing values and expectations. So will ideas with broad support move forward? And if not, is it clear why? There's also oftentimes unequal power dynamics. So who decides which ideas move forward and on what basis, as well as lack of agency. So what's the group's combined capabilities and constraints? Are the right people involved to see ideas through? Those are some of the challenges. But ultimately, I think that this is a great way of doing what Stefan mentioned earlier, really trying to involve people in a new way that can create lasting engagement and just introduce like a whole new set of brilliant ideas to the conversation. Thank you.
Mary, for this and giving us your perspective on basically just asking the questions the other way around. And I'm sure we're going to get back to this, because of course there's the climate change issue. And I think one of the problems is that energy, because it's also cheap in many places, is just not an everyday concern of many people. And on the other hand, we have especially the young people activism, which really brought the topic strongly on the agenda. So, and I think there's a bit of a gap in these two perceptions. On the one hand, understanding the climate crisis and protesting and trying to come up with political actions, but on the other hand, changing everyday's behavior and consuming less and using more public transit rather than private cars and so on. So there's a bit of a discrepancy here that we probably need to address in the final discussion. But if technology allows, I would like to invite Mary Rowe to the stage now. And I think it's a very good follow-up on what we just heard from Maddie. There you are. Very good. So Mary is the executive president, director of the Canadian Urban Institute, and has years of experience on urban advocacy and community. From your perspective, with much more access to the rich and powerful, to see what we can do to bring our agenda forward. And I will move to the slides again and try to bring up your slides. Okay, welcome on stage.
Well, just let me say I'm delighted to join this session and to be with Ursula, because I am so appreciative of the leadership that she and Michael are doing to create this next generation Cities Institute. We need these kinds of provocative ideas, and I can see from the session you've constructed today that it's critical that we have this kind of interdisciplinary approach. And I'm going to think long and hard about the whole concept of empathy. And I feel that COVID basically put us into a situation where we were confronted by our interdependency and how critically important it is to how we rebuild and how we construct our cities, and how dependent they are on capacities for us to support one another in terms of data, solutions, challenges, approaches, interdisciplinary approaches. So I really feel like where we're going is right, and we've been siloed for too long. So as we saw here, we focused on the slides that Ursula's sharing. We realized early in COVID that there was going to be a direct impact on your neighborhood and on your main streets, which were already struggling before COVID because people were buying stuff online. And there were all sorts of generational changes happening on main streets. But this kind of, accelerated during COVID. And at the same time, as we were saying, let's talk about how do we strengthen the capacity of main streets to be economic and social and cultural and environmental drivers. People were saying, oh, you're giving up on the city, you're giving up on downtowns. And we said, no, it has to be both and. The downtowns are where we actually congregate, where we aggregate knowledge, where we experience different kinds of interactions. So those are the two things that we've been kind of focusing on, our lenses. And we feel that those two contexts are the conversation for all the kinds of changes that your co-panelists are raising about how we actually build back better. Next slide, please. So obviously key to this is the slide just previous, which said adaptive reuse. We've got to rethink how we use space. We've got to rethink how we use buildings, how we use spaces between buildings. We need to think about how we build our own resilience and our collective capacity. And what is the implication of working from home? I'm home right this minute. I'll be at the office tomorrow. How does that alter the dynamics of how my life is organized, but also how I collaborate and how we actually come up with solutions? So for us, the challenge now is to planners, I feel, to be really ambitious about what is possible, to not waste this crisis, as they say, but to actually use it to galvanize us to where we know we need to go. You know, this concept in planning of desire paths, where a designer will design a park and say, well, people will walk over here, and they build a little walkway, and then the park's in place for 6 months, and they realize, well, no, actually, people are choosing to walk over here. We've just been through 20 months of people telling us what the desire path is for the future of the city. And so that means we've got to get our systems to catch up We've got to be more agile. We've got to be more flexible. We have to start looking creatively about how do we intensify the assets we've got for housing, accessory dwelling units, rethinking parking. We've got to really think carefully about new financial instruments to make the public realm stronger and placemaking better. And this piece, my little hobby horse, which I think your colleagues agree with, we don't want every city to look the same. Every neighborhood cannot look the same. That isn't how nature do, is it? What we do is we cultivate diversity, differentiation. That means more flexible rules and more responsive to what local priorities and needs are. And I'm hopeful that this will lead us to take more chances, to look differently at how we own land, to look differently at how we share ownership, to look differently at how we nurture this kind of organic, mixed up problem solving, like on the back laneway that I live on, so that we can use all the assets that we've got and not be stuck in some old way of thinking that this is how we've always done it. Next slide, thanks. So obviously the economy is critically important to this, and we need to think carefully about what kinds of jobs we're catalyzing. We can't have weeks of energy focused, I'm talking about mental energy, focused on COP and on the climate challenge, and not have that be an opportunity for us to encourage young people, just as we just heard from Madeline, to pursue problem-solving engagements through their professional lives. So entrepreneurial opportunities, creating different kinds of connections with post-secondaries, as you are doing, Ursula, creating new investment vehicles that would support Indigenous business and minority-owned businesses, all the different, again, untapped potential that's been sitting there dormant, blocked by various things. How do we get those obstacles removed? And then this piece that I mentioned here, we need region-wide, ad hoc, mission-focused approaches that build from the local, focus on cores and on downtown's main streets, and then from there, aggregate up the best solutions, the best approaches, and that municipal leaders can be the innovators and they can be the enablers. Next slide, thanks. So sustainability is something your colleagues have all been talking about here. Again, there are different kinds of mechanisms that we can do to incentivize and support innovation, and governments at all three levels, all three orders need to look at that. Obviously, we need sustainable transit, and I think this government is going to take that seriously. Every other country understands national government has to seed transit investment, and we will not address climate if we don't double down on transportation and double down on buildings, which is both of your colleagues have just been mentioning. And then we need to cultivate an approach that we take action locally. You know that lovely phrase, ask for permission, not ask for forgiveness, not for permission. And the sad thing is that we in Canada have historically been kind of bound by permission-based operations as opposed to just getting on with solving some problems, which I think we're all collectively seized by. Next slide, thanks. Ursula, I'm very impressed that you know where the slides are. Housing is obviously the key point here. It can't be one without the t'other. And so there has to be a way for really bold local leadership that's going to enable intensification. And that may mean taking measures across larger boundaries so that you don't have a situation where people in neighborhoods that have privilege are able to halt any kind of other sharing for that neighborhood to evolve. This is the Gordian knot. Everybody's struggling with it, but we've got to find a way to enable us to all equitably move into new places, new ways of neighborhoods evolving. And so again, you'll see I emphasize here in this slide, it's, you know, communities need to be about choice, 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 so that you have different kinds of housing mix, different kinds of tenancy mix, different kinds of land use mix, different kinds of ways for entrepreneurs to figure out a way to do something fabulous that they will think about, or an artist to figure out how they can do it. And that we need to work with the people the capital stewards, the people that run the money, to find ways for them to flow resources in more innovative ways. Canada has a very conservative, risk-averse system, and the way I think to cope with that is to find ways to get money in smaller increments, where risks can be taken without that then can be corrected so that you mitigate the risk. Next slide, thanks. So similarly, if you look at what has fueled Canada and made us an innovative country, it obviously is fueled by immigration. We have significant challenges now around coming to terms with equity and diversity, and that means Indigenous reconciliation, but it also means anti-racism, and it means looking at exclusive practices. And a lot of the movements that we're talking about here have not been inclusive. They have not, and we have to double down now and figure out how to make room and how to embrace and empower, and empower is not even the right word. We need to affirm the role of everyone in these engagements, and particularly equity-seeking communities, equity-deserving communities. And then the mental health piece at the end there is just this. We have a big focus on downtowns, as I mentioned, and we know that it can't just be about economic recovery. It's got to be about, in tandem, mental health investments, which have to happen at all three orders of government, to support people who need different kinds of mental health support, addiction intervention, and housing choices, and hopefully other ways to attach to the labor market and other aspects of life. And that is a pressing challenge that we see acutely in downtowns across the country, where services have been seriously compromised, and the fissures of our mental health system have just been completely frayed. Next slide, thanks. So I think there's these three things: policy leadership, new financial tools, and then design innovation. And wherever you are in that scheme, maybe you're like me with 3 feet, one in each one of those. We have to bring all of that to bear. And I would encourage the next generation city institutes and everybody tuning in here from CSPC to think carefully about where are the levers, how do you want to spend the balance of your work life? Because frankly, this last 20 months has been the seminal moment in our work careers. And it's a moment of transition where we can really choose how we personally want to contribute, and the kinds of changes that we want to usher and encourage and enable. Next slide. That's it. Last slide is, that's it. Thanks for asking me. So I'm glad to be with you.
Okay, great. So let Mary stay on stage, please. And could we have all the other panelists back on stage, because now it's time for a general debate. Oh, it works for once, so good. So we have several people on stage. So of course, the audience, whoever is listening, could also put questions in the question and answer, and I hope I will see it and can also take questions from the audience. But while you are still thinking of what to ask the panelists, let's just start the debate. I mean, I think we had very different angles to this debate on how do we make change happen and create more empathic and smarter neighborhoods. And I would maybe start with a sort of very pragmatic questions. So given that we need to move fast, and as Mary said, there's such a disruption to our system that happened through the pandemic. I think it's a good time. That's why we named it Building Back Better. Lots of investment money around, and we really should come up with ambitious ideas now and to reach really our 2030 goals. Think about our work-life balance. I mean, everything that has been mentioned so far. So maybe we can do a first round of ideas from the panelists. I mean, if you would need to choose, or what is your priority of action in the next few years to make this change happen that we discussed about? I mean, maybe whatever comes to your mind, where do you think is should be maybe your own focus, or your company, or maybe if it's not yourself, where do you think is action most required, and how would that look like?
Ursula, I'll jump in if I may.
Yes, sure.
I think the biggest challenge today is having the proper ecosystems who has real goals to accomplish, but having this neutral ecosystems where all the stakeholders are talking to each others, you know. There's something very fundamental that was happening in Quebec, and also this is the same stuff in other cities in terms of the procurement process that goes with how governments are looking to have the best solutions. Those neutral ecosystems are the best tools for them to understand what needs to be accomplished with a vision and some perspective. Because actually, from a procurement perspective, there's money available. But actually, the challenge is where the leaders need to have the best solutions. Sometimes we are reacting, and the pandemic gave us reason because we need to do stuff. Where's the solution? My response to them is, what is the problem? Which one we want to address today, next week, for the next 36 months, and for the next 5 years? So procurement is a challenge for municipalities and provincial government and federal government. So having this ecosystems of stakeholders who are aiming to the same goal, creating impact, having a social inclusion perspective is fundamental. It needs to be an open debate. It needs to be inclusive, but also having a business case approach about how do we map the problem to align the solutions. It's so that's a challenge. So the big question is, do we want to hear about the problem versus the solutions? So this is where it's happening into, as I say, above the shoulders. Are we patient to understand what needs to be accomplished, or we need to have a fast solutions right here? That's the challenge. We are in 2022 today, and it doesn't need to be like in 1980s. We need to have perspective and taking the time to raise the right questions prior to push too many solutions. Solutions exist, ecosystems exist, operational systems does exist, but how do we make sure we align all those synergies and forces to map problems that already exist? So we don't need to be blind. We need to be conscious, and this is basically what my to-do is today, even tomorrow morning. You know.
I guess I heard this issue of procurement also a lot from Stefan. So maybe you want to chime in here. And of course, being in a public institution like a university myself, I'm also very aware of if we come up with sustainability action plans and we want to make change happen for sure, we're still bound by so many rules, and comes back a bit to what Mary said. I mean, it's we tend to be very risk averse, and if procurement has always been done via public tendering and you always need to take the cheapest, we're not going to get much further in our solutions. So maybe we can stay a bit on the topic, or whatever else you want to say, Stefan. Oh, we lost him. Stefan, are you still with us?
Well, maybe I can jump in the meantime, Ursula.
Sure.
I think François right in that we need to focus on the issues. And I think in the collaboration, between all parties, we need to make sure that we keep the balls on the issues and what solutions will really answer the issues. I think for my organization, clearly the next 3 years is going to be thinking of the grid of tomorrow. And in the best, most efficient way, taking into account the needs of the population, of the changing needs for tomorrow, and to be able to really capture the opportunities that are there right in front of our eyes. If we think differently, we can capture these opportunities to create value. Value is not only financial value, it has a social, if we think about it from a social standpoint, environmental standpoint, and financial standpoint, to look at the global picture, I think it's going to redefine how we think of solutions to answer our issues. And so sometimes we can kill two birds with one stone, as we say. So in my mind, it's thinking more globally in terms of value creation will also help us finding better solutions for the future.
Thank you.
If I can complete about what Simon just shared, I think from a workforce perspective, the challenge is, do we have enough capacity to deliver all the goods that neighborhood should receive, including how do we manage mental health? How do we manage l'approche des aidants? How do we manage smart health and all those things? Because there's many people that needs to be concerned, and working all together to understand from a capacity perspective, how do we deploy is critical, unless we're going to miss the window. Sometimes we need a big crisis to move forward. I think what happened in Mégantic is very sad, but also it gave a way to redesign what a city should have as a microgrid perspective. And actually from Hydro-Québec perspective, do we have the capacities to develop this and having this open discussion with manufacturers, because Hydro-Québec is not a manufacturer. They provide energy and they need to manage the peak. And now with l'électrification des transports in 2035, the need will be even bigger. So how do we manage capacities aligned with roadmap and having those impact tomorrow? So this is more than planning session. I think the pandemic, as I said, jumpstart all those challenges, but also there's policies that is facilitating this. Let's call the bill with all the new electric cars being sold that will be sold in Quebec by 2035. But 2035 is basically tomorrow from an infrastructure perspective. So it gives pressure on a supplier such as Hydro-Québec, aligned with the manufacturers. And what does it mean for a neighborhood to be resilient and autonomous? This is a huge challenge.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Mary, I mean, you mentioned to be more ambitious and just do things rather than following the established procedures that often make processes very slow. But can you maybe be a bit more concrete of how do we make that happen? Because it's a mentality change, but it's also a change of a whole lot of rules and that are in existence, and many public bodies don't dare to break the rules. So how do we go about it? Do we wait for the politicians to change the bylaws, or we just do it and then see what the punishment is going to be? Or how do you see that happening?
The key thing here is, and we saw it during COVID, the power of pilots, that we did things in smaller scale, and there was a public tolerance that we would try some things because we were in a state of urgency. And so all of a sudden, things that had been impossible to pull off, bike lanes or patios, some of this can get trivialized, and I don't think we want to just talk about that. I think we need to talk about, are there alternate ways to get supports to seniors who are living in congregate living centers? Are there alternate ways to look at getting essential workers into jobs that are safer when the larger transit system is actually compromised, etc.? So I think the perverse benefit of urgency is that we were able to actually get some things done. And as I said, some of them are trivial. Like I can go, you in Quebec don't appreciate this, but in Ontario, Puritan, Ontario, we used to only be able to get a bottle of wine in one place, and now all sorts of small businesses can sell bottles of wine. And that's as I said, that's a kind of trivial example, but I think there are other kinds of examples, like getting public washroom facilities into parks, things like this, that are actually profound in terms of vulnerable populations, where it's a serious question about what amenities exist. Similarly, and I think this is a big thorny thing, is we've seen across the country different kinds of informal housing systems setting up, encampments. And I think we need to learn carefully and thoughtfully about what encampments tell us about. It's a form of a desire path. It's giving us a clue as to, are there other ways to actually create really locally grounded experiment spaces and then learn what worked and what didn't. Encampments in some cases became very dangerous. In other cases, they worked out a different kind of arrangement. So I think part of this is, can we cultivate, and it's difficult, can we cultivate a kind of awareness that neighborhoods have a capacity to self-organize and try things? And are there ways for local governments, municipal governments to support that? You see that in artists all the time, that artists with minimal resources can actually make something fantastic happen. And so again, back to our focus on main streets, that to me is a unit of organization people can get their head around. And on a main street are faith institutions that are underutilized, our libraries, which are continuously changing, different kinds of community spaces, empty parking lots, empty buildings that are in transition. So are there ways to get temporary lease arrangements so that artists can go into there, or small entrepreneurs can go into there? Right a couple blocks from me, an Indigenous artist collective has formed up to do a pop-up. I think this is the kind of granular, take risks, try some things to see, and then, you know, I don't think we can expect government to lead on this. What we expect is for government to create spaces, to create a kind of willingness to try some things in limited settings, and then if they're proven to work, or you discover some things through the process that say, hey, there's the solution, then government needs to be equipped to nimbly and responsively find a way to make that more general and to make that more normalized and accessible to other communities.
That's a great point. I mean, I think that's really a strategy where we could also support, because I think the pilots are always only good if we learn from them, we make them visible, and then try to scale it up. So we need to create this sort of map, I guess, on the experiments that are happening. And I think Simon mentioned it as well. I mean, the Lac Mégantic is just one project. If that needs to scale up, we need to see many of these projects. So, I mean, by analyzing what works, what it costs, what the emission reductions are, or what all the other indicators do, and making that really visible and mapping it out could really help with the scaling up that we need.
You know, I just want to push back on the scale up language, because that gets us into trouble, because it suggests it's a kind of an industrial model. Oh, well, we're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. We're going to do the same. And in fact, I think urbanism and what we're really talking about sustainability is absolutely not that. So I prefer that we, you know, part of what we talk about is spreading an awareness, building a culture of innovation and continuous improvement, so that we know what Abbotsford, or let's look at what's been going on in the West, what Kamloops has been struggling with. We know the solutions that they were trying, and then are there other approaches so that we can mimic, change, adjust? But I'm always cautious about, I'd like to get scale up off our lexicon, because I think it's an old industrial concept. And so, I don't know, it's something else. It's another word that isn't uniform like that. It's like sharing the love, you know what I mean? I don't want that either, but you know what I'm wrestling with, I think.
No, it's a good point. I think it's very much used in the engineering world. So, but you're right, of course. If there are people involved at local experience, it doesn't apply. Maybe we stay for that for a while with Maddie, with your view of, I mean, if we talk about these sort of pilots and neighborhood projects, do you have a kind of vision what you would like to see? What kind of projects would you find interesting, relevant, most necessary to happen in the next few years? Can you maybe off the top of your head come up with some ideas on that, what you would like to see?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, well, I think my perspective on this is that I'm constantly exposed to people who have ideas about things that they'd like to do, essentially based on what they care about and what they feel like intrinsically motivated to engage with, what they have the resources and the network to engage with. But what I've sort of been observing is that so it isn't a lack of ideas. It isn't a lack of interest. It's generally that people are they're sort of locked into systems that are constantly conforming their activities along the lines of, I mean, like money-making activities, because so much of our daily needs are wrapped up in the financial economy. So I think what I'm interested in seeing more, and what I think is needed, and what I'm sort of working towards with some of my work personally, is creating new conditions for people to work within that allow them to act out those ideas, to test them out, to do these things. And it's not just about taking away the systemic constraints. It's also about just recognizing when people have that sort of autonomous motivation, and encouraging them, right? Like I don't know if there's really that many structures outside of university where we really where we really see people engaging with those ideas and just say like, yes, okay, and how can I help you? I mean, we have that in I'd say like incubators for entrepreneurship, but again, this is really along the lines of, okay, how do we make a business case out of it? But we have a lot of issues today. We have a lot of unmet needs in society where the answer is not necessarily a business. And especially if you're going from like, I don't know, if you're starting from zero. So I was really feeling really excited about what I was hearing from Mary about like this focus on pilots and starting small, making things visible, learning from things, and also lowering the stakes. Like, yeah, I think that's a really big issue, right? Is that we need money for things all the time. We need a lot of money, and that's only because most of our systems are sort of structured around that. And I've seen what happens when it isn't, when there are resources that allow people to do things without taking these massive risks, without making these big investments, or needing to get like large sums of money to do things. So I guess what I'm getting at is I would like to see more economic experiments, I should say, like essentially different like small scale different systems that allow people to try things specifically along the lines of what they are autonomously motivated to do. And I think that's going to be really pivotal for kind of what I was talking about earlier when it comes to inviting imagination from people in very highly situated contexts, that is grounded in like the resources that are locally available to them and the people that they have personal connections with. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get an image in my head of what would be the ideal empathic neighborhood look like, and because I mean I'm mainly working on zero carbon cities, and when people come to visit, they say, well, where can we see an example of a zero carbon or positive energy district? And it's actually very hard. I mean, there are no pilots around. It's just we are so much at the beginning of this whole thinking that and if you have solar communities, they're mostly pretty stereotyped and not very fun to live in because they miss all the rest. I mean, access to shops and amenities. So I think it would be really good if we could identify, but what are the features that we want to see in such a neighborhood, and can we not sort of identify at least one pilot where we not just have the economic revitalization and the community projects, but at the same time some thinking about zero carbon and new mobility concepts and so on, where they say, well, let's go to Montreal or go to Vancouver and here's the neighborhood, and where you can actually see and feel how the future could look like. I still think that we are really missing that, and all these pilots only touch one or two aspects on what we've been discussing. So
well, I can just say that you can see glimpses of this through COVID. You know, look at Mile End. Look at what Mile End did through. There are examples of neighborhoods, and you can see it right now in the devastation that the West is dealing with. You see these stories on the news all the time of communities that are stepping in, vendors that are making meals available. There was a wonderful article I just read about food distribution in Brampton that's been doing through home-based kitchens. You know, I think we have been seeing remarkable ways in which people have locally dug into a provision of a service that they could see wasn't being met some other way, and that they had either the motivation, or they had the time, or they had the inclination, or they had the resources, and they stepped in and filled the gap. And I think that the dilemma is that when the world kind of chugs along, we fall into patterns and we make assumptions about how our basic needs are going to get met. And look at vaccine hunters. I don't know whether you've been following this. I'm just fascinated that those guys have resurfaced in the last 24 hours, I don't know whether you're following it, to get vaccine access in Ontario, particularly for parents who were trying to get vaccine appointments for their kids. These are a bunch of 20-something tech geeks that sit up at 2 in the morning and have cognitive surplus and have designed a system to source the appointments really quickly. And you know, they just do it. And I don't know if you really want to have your heart fed today, go look on Twitter at how vaccine hunters post how you get a vaccine appointment, because they don't just say where the vaccines are. They say, oh, and by the way, Joe's Pizza next door has a great margarita pizza if you're hungry while you're there. They boost the local capacity in the economy, and it's a perfect example of the kind of capacity that we have among us to do things. And I think that there are neighborhoods like Mile End, like different components in other cities that are rallying around. And what we need to do is give them some tools, make it easier to farm a land trust, make it easier to have different approaches to property tax, make it easier to, as of right, intensify on your lot, all that kind of stuff. It's a handful of things that we could start to do that would move us forward and engage all of us in very tangible, practical ways to make our neighborhoods and our life more livable and resilient. I think it's the only solution, frankly.
Thanks. I mean, that's
I like to add Ursula on the comment of Marie. There's also synchronicity. I love power of pilots, totally. So here's what's happening. Today, on the federal side, we have le discours du trône. Quebec is into election year, October 2022. Ontario is in election year, June 2022. We just finished our own municipal election program. There's so much need that needs to be accomplished. Now citizens is expecting that all the 3 levels of government can work together to basically bring those projects that have a real impact on neighborhoods, cities, and all those things. The private sectors is ready to move forward. The challenge is, do we go with the minimum requirement, or we go full on with the real requirement? Because one of the discussions that we have with Lumana, and this is the guys from LeMay, we're seeing the building code is a minimum requirement. We want to be better into those building codes today from a policy perspective, because actually, even though maybe Quebec is very lucky because we have Hydro-Québec, but when you go in Ontario, Vermont, New Hampshire, and other states, the energy play is totally different, and the cost with it is totally different. And also from a synchronicity perspective, we need to understand what will be the real impact with the l'électrification des transports. There's law in Quebec that was saying that in 2035, all new cars that will be sold in Quebec will need to be electric. So imagine, those policies are fundamental, and this is what I call a synchronicity of actions from the public service, public government. The private wants to play along, but what does it mean for my daughters? I have 3 kids, and also another topic which is very important. This is what my daughter Romy told me. She's fully in love with bicycles and stuff like this. And I said to her, Romy, why are you still keeping your bicycle during wintertime? Because I'm faster. What do you mean you are faster? I feel more secure on a bike versus walking through a neighborhood. and I go, oh my God. Me as a man, I go, oh shit, I missed something bigger than myself, a white guy in Montreal. And my wife is looking at me, François, this is exactly the purpose. So security become more and more an issue because younger generations doesn't feel as secured. But this is also one of the topic that needs to be addressed today. And technology will be a set of tools only. This is not the end game. So that's why we need to be synchronicity is perfect. And I think today there's so many stuff who is asking us to be forward thinkers. And Marie, to your comment, power of pilot is the only way. Align with scenario, hypothèse, and what kind of issue we want to address. That's the mix of the recipe, I think.
All right, thanks. A lot of topics here, but I want to pose one question from the audience to Simon, from Margaret Savatsky, and it goes in this direction. Basically, what interest is there for revising cities in Canada on a larger scale beyond micro projects and pilots? So are municipal governments, provincial, federal governments willing to invest in the changes being recommended? Because I think there are, of course, many different levels, but I think if you're talking about the built infrastructure, whether it's energy or the buildings, or even the transportation system, we're talking about large-scale investment. So, and I think we need to address that as well. So maybe Simon, can you give us a view of how you see the willingness of these sort of different governmental or governing levels to make this change happening, and how does it align with what we talked about before, with all this sort of local action and citizen involvement?
I think financing small or large projects, there's a lot of money available to do the right thing for the future. But I agree with Mary and François. I think pilot projects is the way to go, because you need to prove something, and then build on it, build it better, and then you can think big picture. But clearly, in my mind, the intention is there. That's what I feel from all government levels, from private investors as well. They're looking for the right projects. But I think we mentioned it before. We really need to think globally. To take it's one thing to redesign the grid from an energy standpoint. That's one thing. But I think Mary mentioned it. There's a lot of other variables that go into it. What kind of neighborhood do you want to live? So you need to really take all of these considerations into play, and really to make a project that will benefit everybody. But it takes a little time, and it takes pilot projects. I agree with the approach. I think it's the best way to do. You do it, you implement it, and then you do a good lessons learned. To make sure that you identify what have you learned through that, and what can you improve for the future. But I think we look at our governments, and the intention is clearly there to support. There's announcements made every week, every month. Towards that. I saw the BIC, Banque d'Infrastructure du Canada, so Infrastructure Bank, I guess, of Canada, announced that they're willing to subsidize, for the electric vehicles, or recharge infrastructure. So I think the desire is there. They just need the right project to be able to do so.
All right, thank you. So we are nearing the end. So we have this time for a short final statement from each of the panelists, and then we wrap up. So whatever you still want to say or summarize in what has been said, you're welcome to do so. Maybe start with François. Oh, we don't hear you. You're mute.
The wrap up, should I?
Yeah. Yes, please.
We need to work all together. This is an ecosystem play. Individuals cannot act alone, meaning organizations, private sectors, and municipal. We need to have this table So we have all the stakeholders sitting and understanding from their perspective, what are the challenges today and what will be the anticipated result next week and the years after. This is an ecosystem play.
Okay, great. Maddie, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. I think we need to. Recognize. We need to broaden our conception of value. Recognize value beyond the financial. Support people in creating other forms of value. Work with autonomous motivations of people, and find different ways of addressing the systemic barriers that they are working against, so that we can activate that latent potential.
Great. So, Mary, your final message. You're still on mute, I guess. We don't hear you yet.
Sorry, I was using Madeline's wise system of muting so that I didn't hear my voice. She's helping me be in the 21st century. Thanks, Madeline. I think that the what we have to just reemphasize is that individual agency really matters here. It's how the future is not. We just cannot wait for politicians to tell us. Like, I used to have this slide with a big red circle with a line through it, and I used to say, "No more Big Daddy." I mean, we just can't operate waiting anymore. We need to be taking action, and we need enabling conditions, and that comes from everybody, from local government, from senior governments, from other governments, and from the industry and from communities. We just need to all dig in. It's all hands on deck. It's time to get busy, as we would say.
Great. Simon, do you want to add?
A little bit like François, collaborate. I think, and collaboration starts with listening and understanding other people's needs. So I think it's the first step. So we need to collaborate and listen to each other.
Well, great. That wraps it up. Thank you all for joining. I totally agree on everything you said. I hope the Next Gen Cities Institute at Concordia can contribute to that collaboration, because that's exactly what we aim for by bringing together all these sort of very different interdisciplinary actors. And we would really love to work in the real world and not in the academic ivory tower. So I hope we can continue that debate and connect with as many listeners as possible after this event. And with that, just in time, thanks for the debate and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a real privilege.